the Museum of Curiosity. And each week I'll be playing the theme tune in a slightly different way. This week it's the turn of the German minimalist composer.
Hello, my name's John Lloyd and I'm the Professor of Ignorance at the University of Buckingham. Joining me as always is our resident musician, scholar and 9 times consecutive winner of the museum's Curator of the Week award, Mr. Bill Bailey.
Yes, although that award, I should add, loses its shine somewhat when you learn I am also the museum's only curator.
The Museum of Curiosity is more than just a collection of buildings. It's better described as a virtual conurbation roughly the size of an imaginary Hertfordshire. Yet it has no room for the sort of exhibit that would merely help you pass an A-level or mingle unnoticed at a party full of geography teachers. The standard of entry for exhibits is so high that the museum is, to all intents and purposes, empty.
Yes, it is. So, basically, I'm a conceptual curator of a virtual museum. But, you know, that's the way, I like it.
Quite, and things are looking up because each week we've got 3 visiting experts to help us resolve our embarrassing lack of exhibits problem by tendering 1 item each to the museum. And this week we're delighted to meet naturalist Alistair Fothergill, anthropologist Victoria Finlay, and socialist Kevin Day. Now, before we fleece them of their unworldly goods, let's meet our 3 contributors. Victoria Finlay is a journalist and social anthropologist who has scoured the earth to research and write 2 brilliant books. The first, Colour Travels Through the Paint Box, is a look at the world's most exotic pigments. Victoria, your research has taken you from the outback of Australia to remote Central American villages and the Buddhas of Bamyan, even those amazing massive sandstone statues in Afghanistan that were blown up by the Taliban. Is there anywhere you haven't been that you'd like to go to?
Oh, loads. But I was thinking that one of the places that I'd love to have gone to was Fez in Morocco, where there are these amazing vats where they dye leather. And I really want to know how smelly those vats are, so I'd like to go there.
Newcastle would give you a hint.
Newcastle was once a place where urine came from for the vats.
I know.
Where did they get the urine for the vats from?
Where did they used to get urine from?
From urine.com.
You're taking it. They used to collect it in buckets in the street, didn't they? And then it was used for dyeing.
Yeah, well, it was a great way to get some money from drinking beer.
What about purple? You know, we think of purple as a kind of imperial purple, don't we? Why is that?
Julius Caesar went and had dinner with Cleopatra in Egypt, and she seduced him, and he noticed that her sofas were dyed purple, and he came back and he said, from now on, only Caesars, i.e. me, can wear purple, all purple togas.
So, Victoria, can I just run that past you again? While he was being seduced by Cleopatra...
He was noticing the sofa, I know.
Yes. That's interesting.
It was purple because it was the most luxurious colour in the Roman world. And to have her whole house done in purple was to show that she really was doing pretty well.
Why was it so expensive?
Because it came from a sea creature that was quite rare even then, and it took tens of thousands of these creatures to dye even 1 toga. So it was immensely expensive, and it was a very rare thing indeed. There were later emperors. There was one emperor who told his wife that she couldn't have a purple dress because he couldn't afford it. It was that expensive.
That's amazing. What's the animal? What's the sea creature?
It's called a murex. It's a small shellfish-type creature. It emits a dye from its glands, and they take the meat and they leave it there in the sunshine for quite a long time. And there is a very good reason that they are on the non-wind side of the city. They're well
smelly.
out.
Okay.
Can I ask Victoria a question about colour? I was at the National Gallery recently. In the medieval section, it tends to be the Virgin Mary. There's a colour blue that was so, it actually made me quite emotional. It was so beautiful to look at, and I just wondered is there a name for that colour blue?
It's called ultramarine, and it's called ultramarine not because it's sea-coloured, which I always thought, but because it comes from beyond the seas. It actually all came during the medieval times, and even now, all genuine ultramarine comes from Afghanistan.
Oh, right.
Indian yellow, that's another colour that features in your book.
Indian yellow is a pigment made from the urine of cows that had been force-fed with mango leaves in India. And I thought that is extraordinary. I'm going to have to find out more about this. I went to the one suburb in India where they made Indian yellow. And the problem is they can't make it anymore because it's actually not very kind to the cows. Cows don't like eating mango leaves. So it was stopped being used in 1907.
Who had the idea to force-feed a cow mango leaves in order to get a different coloured urine?
When I went to this suburb of this Indian town, I was there without an interpreter, and I drew a little picture and I said, cow. And then I said, and and they said milk, and I said no. And they kind of got it.
Well, there you are. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria Finlay. Kevin Day is a stand-up comedian who's performed all around the world and is well known for his outspoken political views. And as a writer, his name has appeared on dozens of comedy shows. Kevin, when I was working in radio in the 70s, the common wisdom was that it was impossible to be both left-wing and funny. Were you left-wing or right-wing in the 70s?
First part of the 70s, I was a member of the National Front, so I think that constitutes right-wing. I'm guessing. I used to refer to myself as a mild Nazi, as though that took the curse off it somewhat, but never mind.
A mild Nazi,
yeah. Well, I then became a member of the Socialist Workers' Party. As a kind of, I've been trying to make up karma-wise for being a member of the National Front ever since, I have to say. I did a show about the fact that I was in the National Front while my best friend, who I grew up with, was black, of course, who used to come along to meetings with me sometimes just to really wind people up, which is very funny. And actually stood up at a meeting once and said, when am I getting sent back, because I'm fed up with the weather.
Were you funny in the 70s?
People talk about the 70s and the early 80s as this great sort of hotbed of alternative left-wing comedy, and it wasn't true, because for every sort of Jeremy Hardy or Mark Steele, you had somebody who juggled meat, for example, or there was a woman who used to do puppet shows with vegetables, who once died on her arse at the Late Show at the Comedy Store and just went, obviously, the wrong vegetables.
Yeah.
So there were, I mean, basically what happened to
They were the wrong vegetables, actually. I was there, I saw that.
I'd like to say the ones that got thrown at her were the right vegetables. Yeah. It certainly became non-sexist and non-racist, which is ironic when you look at Jimmy Carr, that we've come so far. But the thing is, though, that Bernard Manning did the Comedy Store one night and stormed it. Yeah. Sadly, those traditional jokes will still get laughs from a lot of people. There's still a big audience for that sort of joke. In a bizarre sort of way, Bernard Manning almost became a kind of martyr towards the end. He became some kind of underground
sort of champion.
The champion of people's humour. Somehow.
Well, you can't get away from the fact that the technical construction of his material is very strong, even if you don't agree with the political content.
You can't get away from the fact that Hitler gave good speeches.
Quite right.
So. Very well constructed. Punchlines in the right place, but it's just when you read what he had to say that you couldn't...
No, fair enough. Well, lastly, Kevin, can you be taught to write jokes, do you think? What do you do when you sit down to write a joke?
Well, basically, I do the same thing as every comedy writer does. I sit down to write a joke, and then I get distracted by something else. Basically. For example, I sat down to write some stuff the other day, and you whistle a little bit, and you think, I might watch Bargain Hunt now. That would be quite good. There's something on Channel 5, Sharks, Nazis of the Sea. I'll just watch that for a little bit. Fantastic. And then I was actually sit down to write something, and a squirrel fell out of the tree. I think I can't write anything funnier than a squirrel falling out of a tree. It's true, it's hilarious. In fact, the squirrel, actually, I heard this rustling noise, and I swear I heard this little voice go, whoa. But the squirrel got up and he actually brushed himself down. And he looked at me as if to say, it's a game, isn't it? I'm comedied out now.
It's all go with you, Kevin, yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kevin Day. Finally, Alistair Fothergill is arguably the greatest wildlife documentary maker alive, which must mean ever. He's been to the remotest parts of the Earth to create staggeringly enlightening programmes such as The Blue Planet, Life in the Freezer, and most recently Planet Earth. He's such a rare creature himself that in less enlightened times he would have been bagged, stuffed and mounted. Were you one of those children who just can't stop themselves turning over rocks and rootling in ponds for little wiggly things?
I was. I always had far too many small animals under my bed for my mother's liking.
Was there anybody you watched on telly?
I suppose my real hero has always been David Attenborough.
Yes.
I remember when Life on Earth came on, I just had to get home to see it because it was like the most gripping drama. Every week I had to watch that show. And then to actually end up working with him, that was all my dreams come true.
He sort of announced he's retiring.
He'll never retire. I mean, David will die in his safari shorts, to be quite frank. I mean...
Sounds like a threat.
Didn't you nearly kill him once?
Oh, golly. A number of times, actually. We were off the Bahamas diving with wonderful spotted dolphins that come very, very close to you. And to save BBC money, I had the cheapest dive boat in the Bahamas. So cheap that we actually had to build our own platform on the back. It was so badly made, it had great big nails coming out the bottom of it. Anyway, David dives down, does his piece, comes to the surface, starts talking to camera, the whispering Dave, and suddenly this big wave pushes David underneath the dive platform. And this great big nail comes crashing down on David's head. And there is an unconscious, bleeding David Attenborough. And I thought, do you know, I don't think The Man Who Killed David Attenborough is really the best thing to have on your CV. And we ran down the steps. Literally, I physically pulled David and all his dive gear out of the water. I don't know quite how I got the strength. And luckily, he was fine. And that was the first of 3 times that he says I nearly killed him.
Well, you're currently working on a feature film on chimpanzees?
Yeah, my very favourite animal, the chimpanzee.
Did you live in the jungle with chimps?
I did. I spent far too long in the jungle.
Did anything unpleasant happen to you while you were there?
Golly. I'd spent about 8 weeks in the jungle with the chimps, and I came back, and suddenly my testicle went from normal size to cricket ball size. And I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but it is... I can tell you, it's not fun. Anyway, so I admit myself to the Bristol Hospital.
Yeah. And when did they stop laughing?
Well, no, I was waiting in casualty for about 3 hours, and every single nurse on duty that night came down and said, this is the man with the unfeasibly large testicle. And finally, the tropical disease specialist guy comes in and he says, you've got to have a scan. You can't have an X-ray. You've got to go to the maternity hospital. So I go to the maternity hospital, sit in a row with all these women. So I go in there, and this really beautiful, newly qualified blonde doctor puts the jelly on my testicle and literally for 40 minutes plays pocket billiards with me and trying to get a picture of my testicle. Fails completely, and I was trying to think of all the least attractive animals in the natural world, sea slugs, and I'm spending the whole time saying, I have just not got to get excited.
Ladies and gentlemen, Alison Fothergill. Now, let's find out what our experts would like to place in the museum, Mr. Curator.
Thank you very much, Professor. The museum is now ready for its donations. That indicates we are now ready. Victoria Findlay, may we have your submission, please?
I should like very much to give to the museum Pliny the Elder.
Well, I'm all for that. What was he like?
My husband always says he's quite glad that Pliny has passed away because I do spend a lot of time with Pliny and it's quite hard to sort of drag me away from my conversations with him. Pliny was an extraordinary collector of information. I mean, of his 106 volumes, his first one was The Art of Throwing Javelins on Horseback. So he did have sort of quite a wide interest. His natural history is like no other natural history since. And
what sort of period are we talking about here, Victoria?
He died in 79, so it was the years before 79. He was 57
79
when
AD,
he died.
yes.
Not 1970, no, yeah, sorry. In the riot.
No, he was a Roman scholar and he was obsessed by learning. His last few years were spent being an advisor to the emperor, which he would do before dawn because they were both early risers, and then he would do his work in the law courts, and then when he got home he would have a bath and then he would sit on the lawn in the sunshine being read to by a scribe.
So what is it about Pliny then? Was he a naturalist then? He was one of the first kind of collectors of information about the natural world.
He started off as a warrior. He was a cavalry officer. He wrote 20 volumes about the wars in Germany, and then he was most driven to natural history. He did what we can now do on the internet, but even then it's quite an effort. He had 2,000 sources, some of which were very rarely read, and he would write about everything. Stories about giraffes, stories about the deep. He had extraordinary ideas, like the blood of a newly killed goat was the only way to break a diamond, for example. So he collected all these amazing bits of data.
A lot of old rubbish, really,
But he
things
did know.
He overheard in pubs.
He did know that the world was round.
Yes.
Did he, Victoria? He also claimed that hedgehogs used to collect apples by rolling up the trees and spiking them, didn't he?
He did claim that, and he... Pliny did get a lot of things wrong, but he was one of the greatest collectors of information, which is something that I think that you and the team at the museum would be most interested
Particularly in the gift shop, I'd imagine, yes.
Well, the gift shop, Plinian items could be... Pliny claimed to have seen a centaur preserved in honey. That would be kind of nice in a little jar, wouldn't it?
Delicious.
Honeyed centaur, and it's a huge pot. And he also said he'd seen a radish as big as a baby boy.
He believed that the natural world was a theatre that men were there to watch, and that was how he saw it. I mean, he picked up on all these extraordinary myths, and he was trying to make use of them, and he put them together in ways not only that nobody had put them together before, but also we are very grateful to him because most of those 2,000 sources dictated to him in the Sunshine have disappeared, so he's the only source that we have of them.
Well, so there's more in it
than meets the eye, which is why I'd like to present it to you with great honour for your museum.
Well, I'd certainly like to accept that, because apart from anything else, Pliny was the guy who invented the saying in vino veritas, which I think is pretty cool. So Pliny the Elder and gift shop full of centaurs in honey, that's in the museum. Thank you very much.
So, Kevin, what would you like to add to our collection?
I would like to add, because it's taking up a lot of room in my house, the Battle of Waterloo.
Okay.
For two reasons. First of all, historically, I love history. History is my passion. It gives you a context for the way we live now. So, for example, you talk about violent youth. If you know your history, you can tell people that in medieval times you were far more likely to be stabbed than you are now. Less likely to be shot, I admit, but stabbed, certainly. And also because I'm just fascinated by the difference between what you're taught and what is actual reality. And, of course, in the films and in the books, Wellington is this phlegmatic character, and you remember the rigid squares, and you find the truth of that is that Wellington, far from being phlegmatic, was actually terrified the night before the battle and was a womanizer, was a terrible philanderer. You find out that the rigid squares weren't so rigid, they were fluid, and also most of the British soldiers were drunk during the battle because they were given rum and beer beforehand. But even more interesting, I think the Battle of Waterloo should be in there because of what it says about identity, and these are very good facts to wind up Daily Mail readers when you talk about the Battle of Waterloo, because the Battle of Waterloo is probably the most iconic English battle ever. People talk about the playing fields of Eton, and everyone says it's the English army beating Napoleon, but some of them were English, but some of them were also Irish. Quite a few of them were French royalists. There was a lot of Dutch, there was a lot of Belgians, a lot of Brunswickers. It was the Prussians who more or less saved us by arriving in the nick of time. So it was actually a very multicultural affair, which I think is something to be proud of, the fact that other nations were prepared to help us out on this. You learn, of course, which the French are always going about, and turns out to be true, that Napoleon had terrible diarrhea.
Yeah, and don't drink the water.
Don't, exactly. And even better, the battle had its own microclimate. Because there was so much smoke, it created its own kind of rain cloud. So the whole of Belgium that day was really sunny, except for the field where the Battle of Waterloo was, where it was raining very heavily in the morning. And so I think it is the most iconic English battle, but not for the reasons people think it is. It's because it's multicultural. Napoleon had a dodgy curry. The start was delayed by rain. You couldn't get more English than that.
Yeah.
So is there anything that's actually accurate about it, apart from the date?
It's definitely the 18th of June.
Wellington wasn't English either, was
Wellington was Irish, he was Anglo-Irish. But the only thing you can say with any certainty is that we definitely won. There's also a big tourist attraction. During the battle itself, a lot of people came out from Brussels to sort of have a picnic, watch the battle, all very nice. Afterwards, it was a massive tourist attraction. Of course, a lot of the Belgian people got very rich on the back of it by essentially lying about where the battle had taken place. There was Henry Paget, the Earl of Uxbridge, who was the cavalry commander, lost his leg. Famously, Wellington's supposed to have said to him, "My God, sir, you've lost your leg," and he said, "My God, sir, so I have." And the place where his leg was supposedly buried became a huge tourist attraction, mainly on the back of this Belgian peasant thinking, putting a little sign up saying Paget's leg buried here. And also, literally 3 fields away from the battle, the people were just going about their business. The peasants were sowing and doing whatever they were, and just you'd had this astonishing battle. And quite a few people who fought at the battle, it was only years afterwards that they realised that they were at the Battle of Waterloo, because it went by various different names until the official dispatches came out. And it was a very, very violent time. I mean, that's the thing now, people talk about how violent Britain is now. The people of Britain were very violent.
We're still quite violent now, aren't we, really? I mean,
well, yeah, the British people are. Pliny himself would have said the Romans were terrified of the British. They thought we were the most violent people in Europe. We've always had a reputation for being very... London apprentices in the 12th century were known throughout Europe for being violent, racist, homophobic. They loved Jimmy Carr.
So, the Battle of Waterloo, not really English. Some other things that aren't English. Fish and chips, apparently. Fish and chips are Belgian frites with Jewish fish dishes.
The three lions on the English crest are actually leopards. Mm-hmm. They're not lions. The lion came from the nickname of Richard the Lionheart.
Who hated him.
It was essentially French. he spent 6 months of his reign in the country that he described as cold and always raining. So, Richard the Lightweight is what I call him.
Well, St George, patron saint of England.
Was born in Turkey. Cappadocia.
He wasn't.
Yep.
He was.
What about St Patrick?
Welsh, probably. Or
Welsh, yes.
No, or French, maybe.
He was French.
So he was taken as a slave to... It could have been from Breton, apparently. He was taken to Ireland as a slave. And, of course, got rid of all the snakes, which is why Alistair would never have been to Ireland, I imagine.
Well, I've got some things here that are English. Apparently the English invented the can-can. Balti cuisine was invented in Birmingham. Champagne was invented in England. And the lyrics of the German national anthem were written by a Brit. How about that?
Yes. All of these things are British, along with mild eccentricity, binge drinking, and casual violence. Which is a good night out, really, isn't it?
But anyway, you've got to... Are we going to have the whole of the Battle of Waterloo, do you think? Like in miniature, a little model?
There is a famous model of it that was done in about 1825. No, I think we'd probably have the Duke of Wellington in there to represent.
What about the Marquis of Anglesy's leg on a little plinth?
Actually, yeah, we'll have the Marquis of Anglesy's leg. We'll find out where his actual leg was buried. One of the last things he did before he died was to go back to the battlefield, and he had dinner on the table where he lost his leg, which he thought was hilarious.
Oh, that's good. What about the table?
The table on which the Marquis of Anglesley
lost his leg.
Something essentially British. I think that's what we're trying to say.
Yeah.
It's something which is quintessentially British, perhaps, in a slightly unusual way.
Yeah.
And just as a footnote to this, the Times recently asked people to come up with an idea for a motto for Britain using 5 words or less. And the one they came up with, Dipso, Fatso, Bingo, Asbo, Tesco.
Well, the Battle of Waterloo, bink in the museum.
Right, and finally, I come to you. Alistair, what is your submission?
Well, I think I've got a real curiosity for you, and this is an amazing fish called the hairy anglerfish. It's also known as the fan-fin sea devil. We actually caught it for the very, very first time. It's the first specimen, a new species, while we were filming The Blue Planet. It lives down in the deep ocean. It lives about 1,000 meters down in complete darkness. And the anglerfish has the meanest set of teeth you can imagine. I mean, it's basically like an enormous rat trap of teeth sort of hanging in the mid-ocean. It can hardly move. It doesn't have a skeleton like a shallow water fish. It just hangs there, waiting patiently. Now, the hairy anglerfish is particularly special because its body is covered with all these long, long hairs. It looks like this mad gooseberry, really. And basically what it's doing is it's feeling for tiny vibrations, little fish that come close that create vibrations in the water, and then suddenly it'll snap and take anything that comes past. And what's amazing about it, apart from its enormous mouth, is it's got this extraordinary extendable stomach, which means it can actually eat a fish bigger than itself. And it's evolved this because there's so little food down there, you can't be choosy. You know, you've got, if a big meal comes past, you've damn well got to eat it. And we caught it for Blue Planet and catching
But it was really surprised. What are you doing here?
It was pretty cross, I tell you. I mean, the problem is, if you're a diver, you probably know, every 10 meters you descend into the deep ocean, the pressure increases by 1 atmosphere.
If it's so difficult to see anything, and it's an extraordinary, extreme environment, how on earth do these things, reproduce, propagate? I mean, it must be extraordinarily.
How do they find
tricky.
each other?
Yeah.
Well, I have
and
to
then
say,
not eat each other.
No, I mean, basically, the female is a big sort of football size. The male is about the size of a ping pong ball. Okay? And his only function in life when he's born is to find a female.
Yes.
When he finds her, he bites into the side of her stomach, and his whole body basically gets made part of the female anglerfish. And her hormones take him over. I mean, it's the ultimate female, woman's lib. His only function in life is to provide sperm for the female fish.
Or did it have little eyes or a little tiny willy or what?
You don't need a willy if you've just stuck yourself right on, and you don't need a willy.
That's what my wife says. So how much do we know about what's down there? I mean, are we getting to know a lot more? Or
what's amazing about the deep ocean is that if you think about sort of space in terms of volume, 98% of the living space on our planet is the deep ocean. And yet we've probably explored about 2% of it. You know, we know there are about 1.4 million described species in the air, on the land, and in the sea. The most conservative estimates reckon there are between 15 and 30 million undescribed species in the deep ocean. So that is where, you know, there's so much to discover down there.
So there's no chance of any like kind of deep sea tourism happening.
Well, I was just thinking, if Richard Branson gets to hear about the deep ocean, well, we'll never hear the end of it, will we?
Easy sub, that'll be it, won't it? Big coach party.
Did Pliny have anything to say about fish?
Oh, Pliny had a lot to say about fish. He actually had a theory about what he would call monsters of the deep. His theory was that they were formed because of all the swirling around of the depths, and it crushed them and made them into strange shapes.
Well, he's not far off there, was he, really?
He also said that in the Red Sea there were monsters so big because it was so deep that they couldn't even move. They'd got so deep down, so he would have been quite fascinated by the hairy anglerfish.
So how do we get this thing in the museum? Can you deliver us a live one, or can't they be kept alive? It have to be stuffed, will it?
It would have to be pickled,
right.
Pickled in a jar.
Delicious. Right, that's the hairy anglerfish in the museum. Thank you. Well, now it's time to take a core sample from the museum's suggestion box to find out what our audience, the friends of the museum, have come up with to add to our growing collection. Prince Andrew's carbon footprint.
My suggested curiosity is déjà vu. A compass showing which locations are up and which are down, e.g. going down to London.
The feasibility study and risk assessment documents for Stonehenge.
Finally, my suggested curiosity is déjà vu.
Well, that's filled a fraction more exhibition space. We've got Pliny the Elder, a pickled anglerfish with all its appendages intact, and the battle won by everyone but the British. So there's just time to thank our acquisitions committee, Victoria, Kevin and Alistair, and a final thought from you, please, Mr. Curator.
Yes, thank you, Professor. Finish up with a quotation from the great British 20th century philosopher Bertrand Russell. He once said, "My sad conviction is that people can only agree about what they're not really interested in." And I totally agree with that. What do you think, panel? I rest my case.
Thank you very much, and a very good day to you.
The Museum of Curiosity was curated by John Lloyd and Bill Bailey, with research by James Harkin, Xander Cancel and QI. The exhibits were kindly donated by Victoria Finlay, Kevin Day and Alistair Fothergill, and the producers of Curiosity were Richard Turner and Dan Schreiber. If you're the curious sort and you'd like to snoop around the museum's exhibits and prod them, please make your way to the Radio 4 website, where you can find out more about the Museum of Curiosity.